Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. Now in this episode we're going to look at several locos that had minor faults with them, so they didn't warrant an episode all of their own. And to start with, I'm going to start with this Hornby B12 that was sent in by a chap called Keith, who said that it stopped working. Now initially I was a bit worried because these have a reputation for having very dodgy motors in them. So I immediately thought, I bet the motor has failed, as per numerous other videos on YouTube. So I set about taking the body off. Now to do this you have to remove, well, I found it easier to remove the front pony wheels, and that gives you access to the securing screw under there, underneath the smoke box. And then just like the old Triang B12, there is a screw underneath the footplate just there. And once you've released those two screws, the body shell will lift off, revealing the twin flywheel motor and gear train, and there it is. So like I said, initially I thought this motor had failed. As like I said, it's been well documented. So I was a little bit worried, couldn't find a spare motor. So I actually had a complete B12 that was damaged put aside in case I needed any bits off it. And I'm thinking, well, this motor's obviously cheap and unreliable. And that top motor mount there is also laden with solder and seemed to be very weak. So I put the connector on the battery and put it onto the motor terminals. And when I get the wire on there, to my absolute surprise, it actually runs really, really well. No noises, it's virtually silent. So the motor, at this point anyway, is running really well. And I'm thinking, oh, there must be something else wrong with it, or it's just cutting out under load. But as you can see, testing it there, the motor is running really well. So I give it a proper test. Turn it by hand. I'm also going to unclip this gearbox cover to make sure the lubrication's not gone hard or anything. And to be honest, this model was in very good condition. There was no clammy old grease or oil in there. It was virtually fresh from the factory. So I did no work in there. But what I did do was I connected it up to the tender. I thought, well, I'll give it a test. I didn't test it initially because Keith said it didn't work. So I connected it onto the track, put the battery on, and as you saw there, the motor did about the motor did 1.5 turns and conked out. There's nothing at all. So he was right in what he said. This model is a non-runner when placed on the track. So I'm scratching my head now because I know that motor's good. And I'm spinning it by hand, but it's not having it at all. With the battery and the power controller, it's now connected up to a power controller. It's not working at all. So I separated the loco and tender again, put it on the rolling road and connected some leads from a controller, because I thought, well, maybe it's the higher the voltage, more unlikely the motor is to run. But again, motor terminals on its own, and it's running like a Swiss watch. It's absolutely silent. There's no problems whatsoever. So now we're possibly looking at an electrical issue with this model. So I connect the tender up again, and I was loath to do this because those pin connectors on these models can be damaged, and it wouldn't work. So I'm going to have a look in the tender where the DCC socket is to see if this is chipped. I know that Keith has said he's DC only, but it could have a chip in it that's playing up. So to undo the tender, there are two screws in between the first and second wheel in the tender. And once you undo these two screws, the body of the tender lifts off and it's clipped on the back. But there's no chip in it, just a blanking plate. So I have a look, can't see anything obvious in here that is damaged or burnt from overheating or anything like that. So I'm going to take the blanking plate out. And I really am scratching my head at this point. I'm thinking, well, everything looks okay. There's no smells of burning or anything. Everything looks to be okay. No broken wires, no broken pins. But again, connecting it up to the tender, and it just refuses to work. There's no life in it whatsoever when it's connected to the tender. So what I end up doing, I get the power leads from the controller, put them on the blanking plate, and off it goes. it's going, when you touch the terminals on top of the DCC blanking plate, shoots forward as it should do. So I'm holding it now with my thumb and just put it on there, and the model's running properly. So there's obviously some sort of pickup issue, but it's unusual because this has got 6-wheel pickup on each side, but all loco wheels pick up, and so do the tender wheels. So I put the blanking plate back in, touch it on the blanking plate, off it goes. So there's nothing wrong with the wiring, but picking up from the track, it's just not running at all. Touching it on the blanking plate again, and it's running. So I put the model, separate the model yet again, and what I'm going to do with the voltmeter, I'm just going to check the continuation of the electric, and it bleeps. So that side's picking up, no problem. Put it on the pin number 4, and the model is totally dead. It is not picking anything up from this side, from the right hand rail in direction of travel, is completely dead. So the model is not picking up power from one side of the rail. So I've connected the loco and tender back up now, and I'm testing all the wheels. And again, loco, right hand side, nothing. So there is a wiring issue, or at least I think there's a wiring issue with this. It's simply not picking any power up from the right hand rail. So all the pickups are obviously connected to the wheel backs, and the wheels are clean because I cleaned them before testing this. So what I do is I unscrew the DCC socket, have a look round. All the solder joints seem to be good. You know, there's no loose joints, there's no dry joints. So what I ended up doing was I got the soldering iron, and I ended up just touching on one of your, I'll show you in a minute. What I'm doing there is I'm just cleaning some crud away from between the solder joints. So what I do is I touch the solder on one of the joints on the, touch the soldering iron on one of the joints on the socket, test it, and now it's running fine. So there was a loose solder joint, but that's not the end of it. When I put it on the layout, it was this tiny capacitor thing on the DCC socket. I've never seen this on any other DCC socket ever, but it was that tiny capacitor with RD written on it that had failed. So I touched the soldering iron on that, remelted the solder, and now it appears to work. And I say appears because with the battery, it was running nicely. However, this model kept throwing up problems. When I put the body shell back on, that weak joint on the motor that I mentioned snapped. So now the motor's actually disconnected itself. So now I was properly annoyed. And what I did was I got some phosphor bond strip and put it alongside the original terminal, soldered it all up and repaired the motor. Now this is several days later. As you can see, I've actually replaced the DCC socket because it still wasn't working right. You put a chip in it to test it on my layout, and it'd do a quarter wheel turn and die a death. So I've replaced the DCC socket because what I found was this here, this RD capacitor thing that Hornby have put on this for some reason has totally failed. Worked okay with the battery, but on normal DC and DCC operation, the B12 was completely dead. It just wasn't supplying any power to the model at all. So I replaced it with a socket that was donated to me by a chap called Ron, and now it runs absolutely superbly. So it was a faulty DCC socket that was stopping this model from running. And I can't help but wonder if the bad reputation that these models have got for dodgy running is down to that DCC socket. Why there are capacitors on there, I just don't know. It makes no sense. No other model I've ever worked on has got capacitors on the DCC socket. And the motor repair that I did was also working really, really well. But one thing with this model, bits just kept falling off it. The whistle fell off when I wasn't even touching the body shell, and the pipes kept falling off. But once I'd rebuilt it and reattached everything, the model now is an absolutely lovely and superbly quiet runner, and it's all ready to go back to Keith and has been thoroughly tested on my layout. So it was just that little tiny capacitor, less than the size of a pinhead really, something that tiny that was stopping this magnificent looking model from running. And these really are nice looking models. It's a real big step up from the Triang era one. And these models really do have a lot of character. So the second engine I'm going to look at in this episode is a Class 24 that was sent in by David. Now David contacted me and said that he thought he'd blown the DCC decoder in this model. And that the body shell was stuck on. And this is one of the new Bachmann 24s. So having a look round it, you can see that it's in generally good condition. Although David had made a mistake, and he's not the first person to do this. I've seen this done many times. He's removed these screws here that are highly visible underneath the Bachmann 24, thinking that they took the body off. Those actually hold the chassis on to the chassis block. And it is a bit of a bad design by Bachmann that those screws are more visible than the actual body shell screws. The cab inside this end has also fallen to pieces, so I'm going to need to rectify that. So the body shell is well and truly stuck. You can see that the chassis plate there is loose. And to actually access the chassis securing screws, you have to go in through the bogies. They are deeply recessed and they are hidden. I really honestly, this isn't the first time I've done this for people, and I've had to advise in the past how to take the bodies off these 24s. The screws that you can visibly see are not the ones that remove the body. So when I remove the 4 screws that you have to remove to get the body comes off relatively easily, especially when I undo all the screws properly. And it reveals a Zimmo decoder, factory fitted speaker and a stay alive capacitor. But David did say that this model was a non-runner, so he thinks he's blown the chip. But I'm having a look. There are no burn marks, no obvious pop marks. The broken cab fittings have all come out. These are a clip fit, so I'll rebuild this later. The detail on these is really, really good. I've got one of these myself, as if you've seen it on the Garden Railway. And there's even detail cast into the chassis block there as of an engine. Look, it's really good attention to detail. But anyway, this Zimmo 21-pin decoder looks to be in very good condition. Like I said, no burn marks, no pop marks. The wiring's all good. No sooty black marks reminiscent of when a decoder has blown. So I'm going to remove the decoder and have a look on the underside of it. And I'm just going to prise it out with some tweezers. I'm testing the model here with a battery and there's no life at all. So it is indeed a dead duck on DC. So I'm going to get the tweezers and gently prise this decoder off the 21-pin socket. There we go. And again, looking at it properly, there's no burn marks, no nothing on this decoder at all. So I reckon this decoder is okay. It'll be something else stopping this model from running. So I hunt through the my toolbox. I've got a couple of spare blanking plates knocking about. Fit it with a 21-pin blanking plate. Battery test. Off she goes, lovely jubbly. So the model itself is in very, very good working order. There's nothing wrong with the model or the wiring, which is a good thing. Because as you can see, inside these models, it is quite complex to work on. So looking at the decoder again, there is nothing on there to indicate that it's broken. But while the model was in pieces, I did take the bogies off and then give everything a clean the pickups, and I clean all the wheels and the wheel backs. There wasn't a lot of dirt on this at all, but I just did it as a matter of course, so that when it went back to David, it was all clean and fully serviceable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace all these little screws that hold the chassis plate in place. Luckily, David had kept all of them except for one, but one missing isn't too bad. Now there's 4 on the body like this, underneath each bogie, and there's 1 underneath each cab end as well. A total of 6 screws in all. So once that was done, I clip fitted the cab fitting back in place as it should be. This clips into the glazing, and just there you can see the screw hole for that retaining screw that I mentioned earlier. And that is actually part of the body securing screws. You do have to take the ones out under the cab, as well as the ones that are deeply recessed underneath the bogies. So I refit the decoder that came with it, and I'm going to put it on my programming track to see if my gauge master will read it. And it was a bit of trepidation, but it read it as DCC 52, addressed as 52. So at least it's reading the chip. So I put the model on the layout, program it to number 52 and test it. And the model will kick into life very shortly, but none of the lights work. The cab lights and front and back lights are not working whatsoever. Although the model is now running. Well, of a sort anyway. It moved forward and you can see there that the lights are on. It is on number 52, but the lights are not working whatsoever. So it is, the decoder is powering the motor. It's just not doing any functions. So I put the model back on the programming track and I reset the decoder, and I'll put that on screen. If you want to reset a decoder, you have to program CV8 to the value of 8, and that will restore it to factory settings. And when I'd done that, now all the light functions work. It's now gone back to its default setting of default number 3, and the lights are all working. So this was a case, it wasn't a burnt out decoder, it was a corrupted decoder, and I've seen that before as well, where if you have a short circuit on the layout, a decoder can get a little bit corrupted and needs resetting, as is in the case here. So now that the decoder's working and all the lights and the loco's been fully serviced, the body shell was screwed back on, thoroughly tested on the layout, and as you can see, it is a beautiful runner. And yeah, it was just unfortunate that decoder had got corrupt. Now the third loco in this episode is a Hornby A4. Now I put a picture on my workbench of an A4 that I'd had with consistent derailment problems. I'd put it on Instagram and this was the image. Now I bought that A4 because I wanted to convert it into Sir Nigel Gresley, which is a favourite A4 of mine. Although this A4 was damaged, it had damaged valve gear and it needed a wheel replacing. So I repaired all that. I replaced the chimney with a double chimney, as you can see here. Got some nameplates and some transfers and did it all up. And it saved a lot in a spray job of another A4. Using the BR Blue, which I really do like on this model. And the spare A4 chimney that I had off a damaged Mallard body shell. And I've got an A4 Pacific as Sir Nigel Gresley as I wanted to. And the tender on the donor model was not a coronation streamlined tender with a corridor connection, sorry. So the corridor connection was cut off an old triang tender, and so was the walkway, and that was added. I know it's not exactly 100% for the rivet counters, but it will do me for what I wanted. But as I said on Instagram, it was on my workbench because it had a persistent derailment problem. It just would not go around corners. So you ran it like this, and the loco would lift off at the front and derail, and that's on 4th radius corners. And the problem was this: the previous owner had fitted one of these aftermarket clips, and the fact with these is they are sold on eBay as direct replacement for Hornbys, and they do fit the Hornby socket, but the wires are simply too thick. When the A4 was going around the corner, there wasn't enough play in between the tender and the loco, and the thickness and stiffness of the wires was causing the derailments. And that is what it was. After hours of looking at it, that is what the problem was. So what I did, I removed the clip and actually hardwired the loco and tender together, because it is my loco, this isn't somebody else's. I used some of this thin TCS decoder wire, made sure that I'd wired it up correctly after thoroughly testing it, put it back on the layout, and you can see now that it runs around corners absolutely beautifully, no problems at all. And the only other problem with this model was it was DCC sound fitted. But as you can hear now, it certainly wasn't an A4 sound decoder. So what I did was contacted Trains For You, who I bought this off, and Matthew there very kindly had it reblown to the correct sound profile, and now it's got a proper A4 sound in it. And obviously this has gone back a little way because I've not numbered and renamed it at this point. So yeah, that is the A4 that many people commented on my Instagram post. This was the one that had the persistent derailment problem. And although the tender isn't exactly as it should be, it's missing the porthole and some footsteps, I'm really pleased that I've now got a Sir Nigel Gresley A4. Because not only do I like the BR Express Passenger Blue livery, But I just like Sir Nigel Gresley. I remember seeing this with my granddad at the Nene Valley Railway in the 90s. And here you can see me, I've also got up close and personal with it when it's been into work on several occasions. Now the last loco to feature in the video is somewhat different. This is a Roco American engine that came in a train set, a digital set that I'm repairing for Liz, whose LMS tank we did a few episodes ago. And again, this was a non-runner, and bizarrely, this again, DCC fitted, also had a corrupt decoder. So this was given a service, cleaned the wheels as it's been in storage for 20 years or so, cleaned the wheels, give the motor some fresh lubrication, reprogrammed the decoder, which took a bit of doing because the Gauge Master system didn't like the Roco decoder, but eventually we got there. And I think this is the first American diesel that has traversed my sea wall. But it certainly did look different. But it's a lovely, powerful, smooth, quiet runner for a model like this. And it's the first Roco diesel I'd ever worked on. But I didn't film it because, like I said, I thought the decoder had blown, but it ended up being corrupt again. So thank you again for watching. A bit different this time. But if you've got anything you'd like to see featured on an episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look and get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. So I'll leave you now with the various engines running around the layout that are featured in this video. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll thank you all so much for watching. Bye for now.